$400,000 inherited, never touched it. 7 years later, it's grown to 900,000, and mom says it's time for a house. The math disagrees. This one's going to surprise you. Hey Profiteer, Eric here. Welcome back to Real Money Stories. Today's episode comes from the Personal Finance subreddit, and it's one of the most genuinely interesting rent versus buy dilemmas I've come across in a long time. This one comes from the Personal Finance subreddit. The title is simply, "As it's smarter to keep renting?" Let me read it to you in their own words. I'm in what I believe is a pretty unique situation. About 7 years ago, I inherited approximately $400,000. I never touched it, and today it has reached $900,000. I work in a restaurant and don't make a ton of money, but my bills are paid. Rent is $2,000 a month, no debt, no kids, no other expenses. There is rent stabilization here, so it can't be raised more than 6% per lease, and I sign 2-year leases. I max out my Roth IRA every year, but I don't save any money outside of that. My mom thinks I should buy a home, but 1-bedroom condos in my area range from $400 to $600K. I think keeping the inherited money invested and untouched will, long-term, make me more money than not paying rent would save me. I feel like everyone's goal is to own property, but I just don't think it makes sense in my situation. Any advice about why I may be wrong would be appreciated. Okay. First thing I want to say, reading this to the original poster is asking exactly the right question. Not validate me. Not prove my mom wrong, but genuinely show me where I might be off. That's intellectual honesty, and it matters a great deal when you're staring down a decision this large. And I'll be upfront, reading this, my gut reaction was that their instincts are pretty sound. Let me walk through why, and then I'll flag the one thing they're probably underestimating. I've been writing about personal finance for over a decade, and the assumption that comes up constantly in comment sections, in family dinner conversations, at every holiday table, is that owning is always smarter than renting. It's one of the most persistent myths in this space. It isn't universally true. It depends entirely on the math of your specific situation. And in this situation, the math is pretty vocal. Here's the first framework I'd reach for. It's called the price to rent ratio. Simple concept, take the purchase price of a home and divide it by the annual rent you'd pay for something comparable. The result tells you whether a given market tilts toward buyers or renters. Below 15, buying tends to win. Between 15 and 20, you're in judgment, call territory, and your personal circumstances start doing most of the deciding. Above 20, renting typically makes more financial sense, and here's why. At that ratio, the capital you'd tie up in the home would generate more wealth if it stayed invested than the avoided rent payments would save you. Let's run the numbers for the original poster. $2,000 a month in rent is $24,000 a year. Condos in their area run $400,000 to $600,000. Call it $500,000 at the midpoint. 500,000 divided by 20, 4,000 is about 20.8. That puts them squarely in the zone where renting is probably the stronger financial move. And that's before we even factor into the rent stabilization, which I'll get to in a moment. The second framework is the total cost of home ownership. This is where a lot of people get genuinely surprised because the mortgage is only part of it. On a $500,000 condo, financed with 20% down at current rates, the monthly principal and interest payment alone is somewhere around $2,600. But then there's property taxes. On a condo at that price point, depending on the state, that could be $500 to $600 a month. HOA fees on a condo can run anywhere from $400 to $800 a month or higher. Homeowners insurance and a maintenance reserve. The standard rule of thumb is to budget 1% of the home's value per year for upkeep. On a $500,000 property, that's $5,000 a year, or roughly $400 a month sitting in a reserve account. Add all that up and you're probably looking at a total monthly cost of ownership somewhere north of $4,000. Against $2,000 in stabilized rent, that's a gap of $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year that stays in their pocket or goes back into the portfolio if they stay where they are, which leads directly to framework 3, the opportunity cost of capital. Here's the core idea, and the mechanism matters. Money that isn't working for you is working against you because it's not growing. $400,000 compounded to $900,000 in 7 years. That's roughly a 12% annualized return, which is above the long run average, so let's be conservative going forward. At 7% annually, $900,000 becomes around $3.5 million in 20 years. That's the compounding engine we're talking about disrupting. Now, here's where it gets complicated. The original poster says they want to keep the money invested and untouched. Great plan. But what happens if 5 or 10 years from now they change their mind? Life does that. A partner enters the picture. A city becomes unaffordable. Circumstances shift. Here's the wrinkle most people miss. Their inherited portfolio has what's called a stepped-up cost basis. That means, for tax purposes, their cost basis was set at the approximate value of the portfolio on the day they inherited it, around $400,000. The portfolio is now worth $900,000. That's $500,000 in unrealized capital gains. If they liquidate enough holdings to buy a $500,000 condo outright, they could be looking at a federal capital gains tax bill of $75,000 or more before state taxes. Not a reason to never buy, but a very real cost that nearly every just buy a house recommendation ignores. Knowing this now means they can plan ahead and structure a purchase that doesn't trigger a giant, avoidable tax event. Just a friendly reminder that this episode is intended for entertainment and education purposes only and should not be considered financial or legal advice. Given the tax complexity here especially, please talk to a qualified financial advisor and a CPA about your specific situation before making any moves. Now let me highlight something that the original poster almost buried in their post, like they didn't fully realize how valuable it is. The rent stabilization. A 6% cap with 2-year lease terms is a form of housing cost predictability that most renters in this country simply do not have. And here's the thing about owning a condo that often gets glossed over: property taxes can go up. HOA fees can rise. Special assessments arrive without warning. A $15,000 roof repair. A structural issue in the building. A major plumbing job. Those costs land entirely on the owner with no cap and no 2-year buffer. The original poster has locked in predictable, protected housing costs. That's real. That is dollar value. Don't underestimate it. One thing I do want to flag gently, because it's worth a moment of attention. They mention they don't save any money outside of the Roth IRA. Given the size of the portfolio, that's probably fine in the broad sense. But the 3 to 6 month emergency fund rule still applies, even for people with substantial assets. The distinction that matters: if an emergency forces them to sell taxable investments at a bad market moment, that's a painful situation, and it also triggers a taxable event. Make sure there's actual liquid cash sitting somewhere accessible, not just portfolio value on a screen. The Roth IRA piece, that takes real discipline on a restaurant income. And having that tax-free growth bucket sitting alongside a taxable portfolio is genuinely smart long-term tax diversification. That part needs no adjustment. So, to answer the original poster's question directly, I don't think they're wrong. The price-to-rent ratio leans toward renting. The total cost of ownership would run them significantly more per month than their current rent. The portfolio is compounding at a rate that's historically hard for residential real estate to match over a 20 or 30-year horizon. And they have a rent stabilization arrangement that most renters would genuinely envy. The advice I'd give is stay the course, but get organized. Understand the tax situation on that portfolio before you make any moves. Keep accessible liquid cash for emergencies. And if the buy question ever comes back around, talk to a CPA first. The specific situation here is $900,000, $2,000-odd stabilized rent, and condos at $500,000. But the principle stretches well beyond those numbers. Rent versus buy is not a values question. It's not about what you're supposed to want or what everyone around the dinner table expects from you. It's a math problem. Your price to rent ratio, your total cost of ownership, your opportunity cost, your tax picture. Those are the inputs that matter. Run the numbers, not the assumptions. If you found this helpful, share it with someone dealing with the same thing. Until next time, stay profitable.